Hello, welcome to More Tools and Sense, the show where I just hide in my garage, but the real reward is all the friends I've ignored along the way. Today, we're going to take the rolly bits, and we're going to stick them on the rusty bits. Alright, well before I even try to put the body down on the engine, there's one thing we got to take care of, and that's the fact that with the headers on, this engine is 26 inches wide, maybe only 25, but the space between the two inner fenders is 23 inches. So I think we're just going to hack all of that out of the body before we even mess with it, because it's going to end up being in the way. And even if it's not completely in the way, it'll be way easier to work on if there's just more space in there. So let me get that Sawzall. Alright, well the engine is inside the engine bay, the body's down on top of the frame, however it is not lined up properly, because if I did that, the engine would be inside the firewall. So what we need to do is move the whole frame back about 2.5 inches. In order to accomplish that, I'm going to have to cut a big chunk of firewall out, and then I'm going to add a about 4-inch spacer, and then weld it back together. With everything back together and the engine in place, I was able to check all the clearances and made a real quick CAD template just to check and make sure that that 4-inch bump out I had was going to be enough. And it's looking pretty good, so I'm going to go ahead and pull everything apart and we're going to start fabricating some metal. Okay, well I've made a panel to fill the gap, and I've got the old panel cut out and just clamped together so I can kind of see where it is. I've got a level on here so that I can try to get it flat. I have to figure out where these corners are going to go, and then I can try to figure out the mess that is the bottom part of this piece of metal, because I don't really know how to do that yet, but we'll figure it out as we go. Delicious asbestos. Is there anything worse than asbestos? What came before asbestos? This is the 50s. Alright, well the patch panel is nearly done, but before I do anything else, I want to get the motor back in here and make sure that I didn't screw it up. And I don't want anything hitting anything. I want to make sure I can get to all the bolts and everything I need to. And then after that I can figure out whether I want to screw this together so I can have an access panel, or whether I want to weld it together and make a little more reinforced structure. Well, the transmission fits nicely into the transmission tunnel, so I don't have to modify that too much, but I do need to cut a hole for the shifter, because this used to have a 3 on the tree, and obviously this shifter's on the floor. And there is also another spot where the transmission is actually hitting a small section of the floor pan, so we're going to have to notch that. But other than that, it should be pretty simple. Well, the shifter's installed, so you know that means there's one important step that needs to come next. Alright, well with the engine in there, everything all together, the panels thrown in there, it looks like there's plenty of space to access the transmission bolts, the oil sender, the distributor all have plenty of room, so I'm going to go ahead and weld it up. That's going to be easier because there's not quite enough overlap for screws all the way around. But since everything's all together, I'm not going to weld it right now. I'm going to work on some body mounts first, and then when it comes apart, I'll finish welding it later. Alright, so these headers don't fit inside this frame, which I really should have known because the guy I bought it from said they wouldn't fit on his Durango, which is probably pretty much the exact same thing. But at any rate, instead of trying to modify the headers, I'm just going to cut a big old chunk out of the frame rail and then weld it back in a different shape. Alright, well I cut a big chunk out of the frame rail and it's still hitting the frame rail, and I can't really cut anymore because then I'll be getting too close to the suspension and doing a whole bunch of other crap. So I guess we're going to have to do it the hard way and modify the headers. I was trying to avoid this because it's going to be a lot more work, but it seems like it's the only way to do it, so let's get started. Alright, well the header is done and installed and I'm pretty happy with it. It's not pretty, and one of the tubes is going to be a different length from the other three, which is pretty annoying, but I didn't have enough material or patience to make it fit, so it's just going to have to be shorter. But other than that, it clears everything nicely, and there's enough room to install the starter without removing the headers, which is a big bonus, because I wasn't sure I was going to be able to do that. Well, now that the headers are fixed, I can pull the engine out and fix that spot on the frame rail that I cut up and bashed in with a hammer for absolutely no reason. So back here under the trunk, there is nothing, and in order to fix that, first I'm going to get some box tube, and I'm going to make a brace that comes down and across and back up, and that's going to allow me to put the body mounts right down here, and then also it's going to allow me to build the sheet panel to go to the trunk floor and touch that, and then we'll have something to build off of. Well, now it's time to make some extra space in the trunk, and that's going to be for a couple of reasons. First of all, the trunk floor was already missing, so it's going to have to be replaced anyway. Second of all, I want to make sure there's more space back here. So the body's been lifted so I can drop the trunk floor and the rear passenger floor down even lower and make more space inside the car. And third of all, this is a Fury Road war machine, which means you need to be able to be in the back. There's probably going to be a bumper stand back here. You need to be able to be in the trunk. You need to be able to be in the rear passenger seat, maybe up through the roof, and you need to be able to be in the driver's seat, and you need to be able to move through the car and get to all of those places so that you can properly do war versus whichever faction is trying to steal your guzzling. All right, so let's get started and do some cutting. Alright, well now that I've cut out all of the sheet metal, I'm going to have to work on putting it all back. And I think I'm going to have to think about this for a while because there's a lot of weird angles to try to get them all meet up together. And the guys over at Bad Obsession Motorsports, they say when they're thinking, they have tea and a biscuit. Kind of an odd combination, but not bad. well, the trunk floor is completely done, and I've welded it all together, so I think that means I can go ahead and put the welder away, and I don't have to... Well, that's all the time we have for today, but tune into the next episode, and I swear I will do more than just weld sheet metal. We're going to be doing pedals, welding together a drive shaft in a sketchy operation, and getting us one step closer to making big noise in the Studebreaker. See you next time.